The radio crackled with static that morning, cutting through the pre-dawn silence like a blade. Colonel Marcus Reeves pressed his headset closer, straining to catch the fragmented transmission bleeding through enemy jamming. Bridge, compromised. Enemy armor, 3 clicks out. The voice faded into electronic snow, leaving only the sound of his own breathing in the command bunker buried beneath 40 feet of reinforced concrete. 300 yards above, the Kharkov Bridge stretched across the Dniester like a steel spine, its massive girders casting long shadows in the pale morning light. Intelligence had been clear: hold this crossing, and the entire eastern flank would collapse within hours. Lose it, and 20,000 Allied forces would find themselves cut off, surrounded and systematically destroyed by advancing enemy mechanized divisions already massing beyond the tree line. Reeves studied the tactical display, watching red contacts multiply like cancer cells across the digital map. Tank signatures, infantry fighting vehicles, self-propelled artillery. Everything pointed to a coordinated assault designed to punch through their defensive line before air support could respond. The nearest fighter squadron was 30 minutes out, an eternity in modern warfare where battles were decided in heartbeats. "Sir, we've got movement on the northern approach." Sergeant Rodriguez's voice carried the tension of a man watching his own death crawl toward him through a rifle scope. "Estimate 2 companies of T-90s, supported infantry. They're coming fast." The colonel's jaw tightened as he processed the numbers. 2 companies meant 60 main battle tanks, plus whatever was rolling behind them in the dust cloud now visible on the horizon. His defensive positions were built for harassment, not prolonged engagement. Light anti-tank weapons, improvised obstacles, and a prayer that someone upstairs would notice their situation before it became academic. He reached for the radio, knowing the transmission would likely be his unit's final communication. "All stations, this is Blackwater 6. Enemy armor approaching Bridge Objective Sierra in overwhelming force. Request immediate air support. Danger close. Authorization approved." The words felt hollow as they left his lips. 30 minutes was 29 minutes too long. That's when the sound reached them, a low, distinctive growl that seemed to emanate from the earth itself. Not the high whine of jets or the rhythmic thump of helicopters, but something different, something older and infinitely more dangerous. Rodriguez looked up from his scope, confusion replacing fear on his weathered face. "Colonel, what the hell is that sound?" Reeves didn't answer immediately. He'd heard that particular engine note before, in places where Hope came wearing desert camouflage and speaking with a southern drawl. But the pilot who made that sound was supposed to be grounded, her wings clipped by bureaucratic scissors and political convenience. Captain Elena Ripper Vasquez hadn't flown combat missions in 18 months, not since the inquiry that nearly ended her career over what some called excessive aggression, and others recognized as the difference between victory and defeat. The growing roar suggested someone had just made an executive decision about regulations. Outside the bunker, the first enemy shells began falling on the bridge's northern approaches, sending concrete and steel fragments spinning through the morning air. The sound of destruction mixed with that approaching growl, creating a symphony of violence that would define the next few hours. Reeves found himself holding his breath, caught between the certainty of tactical disaster and the impossible hope represented by that familiar engine signature. Through the reinforced observation slit, he caught a glimpse of movement against the clouded sky. Low, fast, painted in the mottled gray and green that marked aircraft designed for one specific mission, turning enemy armor into scrap metal and bad memories. The A-10 Thunderbolt II emerged from the cloud cover like an avenging angel, its twin engines screaming defiance at the assembled enemy force now spread across 3 miles of open ground. But this wasn't just any A-10. Even at distance, Reeves could make out the distinctive nose art, a grinning skull wearing aviator sunglasses, surrounded by small bomb symbols that told the story of previous engagements. "Blackwater 6, this is Reaper 17. The voice on the radio was calm, professional, and unmistakably feminine. "I understand you gentlemen have a tank problem." Reeves keyed his microphone with hands that suddenly felt steady for the first time in hours. "Reaper 17, we have multiple armor contacts advancing on Bridge Objective Sierra. Estimate 60-plus main battle tanks with supporting elements. Danger close engagement authorized." There was a pause, filled with the sound of the A-10's engine's shifting pitch as the aircraft banked into its attack run. When Captain Vasquez spoke again, her voice carried the cold precision of someone who had stared death in the face so many times they'd become old friends. "Copy Blackwater 6. 60 tanks, you said." Another pause. "Well, I've got 30mm answers for every one of them. Recommend your people keep their heads down. This might get loud." The first pass came without warning, the A-10 materializing over the enemy formation like a shark breaching in shallow water. The GAU-8 Avenger cannon spoke once, a sound like the universe tearing itself apart, and an entire platoon of T-90s simply ceased to exist, replaced by expanding fireballs and twisted metal that tumbled end over end across the battlefield. Rodriguez pressed his face against his scope, watching enemy infantry scatter like ants from a disturbed nest. "Holy shit, Colonel. She just evaporated 4 tanks in 2 seconds. But Reeves was already plotting the tactical situation, his mind racing through possibilities that moments before had seemed like fantasies. One aircraft against 60 tanks wasn't just mathematically impossible, it was suicide. Even the legendary A-10 couldn't survive concentrated surface-to-air fire from that many platforms. Yet here was Ripper, making her second pass, while enemy gunners were still trying to figure out what had hit them. The radio crackled again. "Blackwater 6, Reaper 17, be advised I'm taking heavy ground fire. Gonna have to get creative with my approach angles." Through his binoculars, Reeves watched the A-10 pull up sharply, evading a stream of tracer rounds that lit up the morning sky like deadly fireworks. 2 surface-to-air missiles streaked upward, their contrails drawing white lines against the gray clouds. Vasquez rolled inverted, dove toward the deck, and somehow managed to thread the needle between the incoming threats while simultaneously lining up her next target. "How the hell did she get flight clearance?" Rodriguez muttered, never taking his eyes off the unfolding air show. Reeves smiled grimly. "She probably didn't." The implications of that statement hung in the air like smoke. Captain Elena Vasquez had been effectively blacklisted from combat operations after the Kandahar incident, her career destroyed by politicians who valued optics over operational effectiveness. For her to be here, flying this mission, meant she'd either received orders from someone with serious pull, or she decided that sometimes doing the right thing was more important than following regulations. Either way, she was currently the only thing standing between Reeves' men and systematic annihilation. The third pass was different. Instead of the devastating straight-line attack runs that had characterized her first 2 engagements, Vasquez brought the A-10 in low and fast from the east, using a ridge line to mask her approach until the last possible second. The enemy had learned to expect her attacks from specific vectors, concentrating their defensive fire accordingly. She punished that assumption by appearing where physics suggested she couldn't possibly be. The GAU-8 spoke again, its distinctive BRRRRT sound echoing off the surrounding hills as another group of tanks transformed into burning monuments to the effectiveness of American air power. But this time, the enemy was ready. A ZSU-23-4 anti-aircraft gun that had remained hidden in the tree line opened fire, sending a stream of high-explosive rounds toward the A-10's position. Reeves watched in horrified fascination as tracers stitched across the sky, some passing so close to the aircraft that he was certain they'd found their mark. But somehow, impossibly, Vasquez managed to keep flying, her aircraft dancing between the lethal streams with a grace that defied both logic and the laws of aerodynamics. "Blackwater 6, Reaper 17, her voice came through the radio, slightly strained now but still rock steady. That flak gun is becoming a problem. Can you paint it with laser designation? Reeves grabbed his targeting system, swinging the device toward the anti-aircraft position. Reaper 17, target painted. You have good laser. Copy, coming in hot. What happened next would be analyzed in military academies for decades. Instead of attacking the flak gun directly, Vasquez used a Maverick missile to collapse a section of hillside above the enemy position, bringing several tons of rock and debris down on the gun crew while simultaneously providing herself with cover for her next attack run. It was improvised, creative, and absolutely devastating in its effectiveness. By the time the dust settled, half the enemy armor column had been reduced to scrap metal, and the remainder was pulling back in obvious disarray. Captain Elena Vasquez had earned her call sign Ripper during her third deployment, when she'd single-handedly destroyed an entire Taliban convoy that had been threatening a Marine forward operating base. The engagement lasted 47 minutes and resulted in complete tactical victory with zero friendly casualties. Military analysts called it a textbook example of close air support. Her commanding officer called it the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. The Pentagon called it excessive use of force and launched an investigation. That investigation had focused on 17 separate engagements where Vasquez had exceeded mission parameters, pursuing enemy forces beyond designated areas and engaging targets not specifically authorized by ground controllers. The review board questioned her judgment, her adherence to rules of engagement, and ultimately her fitness for continued combat operations. What they never questioned was her effectiveness. In 4 deployments spanning 6 years, Captain Vasquez had flown over 300 combat sorties without losing a single aircraft or failing to complete a mission. Her strike accuracy was 97%, and ground commanders specifically requested her by call sign for critical operations. None of that mattered to the review board, composed primarily of officers who had never heard hostile fire outside of training exercises. They saw insubordination where combat veterans saw initiative, recklessness where experienced pilots recognized split-second tactical brilliance. The final report recommended reassignment to non-combat duties, effectively ending one of the most successful close air support careers in military history. That was 18 months ago. Today, watching her systematically dismantle an enemy armored column with the kind of precision that couldn't be taught in any flight school, Colonel Reeves understood why ground commanders had been so reluctant to accept the Pentagon's decision. Blackwater 6, Reaper 17. I'm Winchester on cannon rounds and down to 2 Mavericks. Request ammunition status on remaining enemy contacts. Reeves surveyed the battlefield through his binoculars. Where 60 tanks had been advancing an hour ago, fewer than 20 remained operational, and those were continuing their withdrawal toward the tree line. Burning vehicles scattered across 3 square miles of terrain told the story of an engagement that would redefine expectations about what a single aircraft could accomplish against overwhelming odds. Reaper 17, estimate 20 enemy vehicles still mobile, all withdrawing northeast. You've broken their assault. There was a long pause before Vasquez responded, and when she did, her voice carried a weariness that spoke to something deeper than physical fatigue. Copy, Blackwater 6. Be advised, I'm showing multiple system warnings up here. This old bird took more hits than I'd like to admit. For the first time since the engagement began, Reeves felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning temperature. The A-10 was legendary for its ability to absorb damage and keep flying, but every aircraft had limits. If Vasquez had been taking ground fire for the past hour while making repeated attack runs, the accumulated damage could be catastrophic. Reaper 17, what's your status? Can you make it back to base? Another pause, longer this time. Through his binoculars, Reeves could see the climbing slowly black smoke trailing from what appeared to be the left engine nacelle. The aircraft's flight path seemed less stable now, small corrections visible in the way it moved through the air. Blackwater 6, I'm going to be honest with you. I've got hydraulic problems, engine issues, and half my warning lights are doing Christmas impressions. But I can still fly, and those remaining tanks are still a threat to your position. Reeves keyed his microphone immediately. Negative, Reaper 17. You've done enough. RTB immediately and get that bird on the ground before something vital breaks. With respect, Colonel, that's not your call to make. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Technically, she was right. As pilot in command of her aircraft, Captain Vasquez had final authority over flight operations. But practically, she was talking about flying a damaged aircraft against an enemy that had spent the last hour learning how to kill her. Before Reeves could respond, Rodriguez grabbed his arm. "Colonel, look at the northern approach. Something's coming through the tree line." Reeves swung his binoculars toward the indicated area and felt his stomach drop. Moving between the burning hulks of the retreating tanks was something he'd hoped never to see on this battlefield. A mobile surface-to-air missile system, its radar dish already rotating as it searched for aerial targets. The SA-15 Gauntlet was specifically designed to kill low-flying aircraft like the A-10. Its missiles were faster, more maneuverable, and far more lethal than anything the previous enemy formation had been carrying. In her current condition, with damaged systems and limited maneuverability, Vasquez wouldn't stand a chance against it. Reaper 17, be advised we have SAM site active northern tree line. Recommend immediate egress, maximum altitude. I see it, Blackwater 6. Her voice was steady, professional, but Reeves could hear the underlying tension. She knew the tactical situation as well as he did. That thing's going to light up every aircraft within 50 miles. Your reinforcements won't be able to get close enough to help. She was right, and they both knew it. The SA-15 had an engagement envelope that effectively created a no-fly zone around the bridge area. When the promised air support finally arrived, they'd find themselves facing a defensive system specifically designed to negate their advantages. Unless someone dealt with it first. Blackwater 6, I'm going to need you to paint that SAM site for me. Reeves closed his eyes, understanding immediately what she was planning. Reaper 17, that system is specifically designed to kill aircraft like yours. You're damaged, low on ammunition, and they'll be expecting you. This is suicide. Maybe, but if I don't take that shot, how many other pilots die when they try to help you? How many ground units get overrun because air support can't reach them? The question cut to the heart of military decision-making, the cold calculus that weighed individual risk against mission requirements. Reeves had made similar decisions countless times, sending people into danger because the alternative was worse. But those had been orders given to subordinates, not requests from someone flying a crippled aircraft toward almost certain death. Elena, he used her first name, abandoning military protocol. You've already done more than anyone could ask. You saved this bridge, probably saved my entire unit. No one will question it if you RTB now. There was a long silence, broken only by the sound of the A-10's damaged engines growing more labored. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of every mission she'd flown, every decision that had brought her to this moment. Marcus, you know better than that. We don't do this job for the recognition or because someone's keeping score. We do it because when good people are in trouble, someone has to stand up and help. A pause. Besides, you think I'm going to let some surface-to-air missile be the thing that finally stops Ripper? Not a chance. Reeves found himself smiling despite the circumstances. It was exactly the kind of response he should have expected from someone who had built a legendary career on doing impossible things in impossible circumstances. Roger, Reaper 17, target designation in progress. He swung the laser targeting system toward the SAM site, watching through the scope as the mobile launcher continued its methodical search pattern. The crew was professional, experienced, and undoubtedly aware that they were about to engage one of the most dangerous close air support pilots in military history. They were also about to learn why Elena Vasquez had never failed to complete a mission. The final attack run began differently than the previous ones. Instead of the aggressive, diving approach that had characterized her earlier passes, Vasquez brought the A-10 in level and steady, almost casually. To the enemy crew below, it might have looked like the approach of a damaged aircraft making one last desperate attempt before retreating. They would have been half right. Reeves watched through his scope as the SAM site's radar locked onto the approaching aircraft, its launcher rotating to track the incoming threat. Warning indicators would be screaming in Vasquez's cockpit now, telling her that she was seconds away from being engaged by a system designed specifically to kill her aircraft. Reaper 17, you're being painted. Multiple missile warnings. Copy Blackwater 6, I see them. Just keep that laser steady. The SA-15 fired 2 missiles simultaneously, their rocket motors igniting in brilliant flashes that sent twin contrails streaking toward the A-10. At that range, with a target flying straight and level, they should have been impossible to evade. But Elena Vasquez had built her reputation on making impossible things look routine. At the last possible second, she rolled the aircraft hard left while simultaneously popping chaff and flare decoys. The first missile lost lock, exploding harmlessly in the chaff cloud. The second missile maintained tracking but couldn't adjust quickly enough to the A-10's sudden change in vector, streaking past the aircraft's right wingtip with less than 10 feet to spare, which put Vasquez exactly where she wanted to be for her final shot. The Maverick missile launched at point-blank range, its seeker head immediately acquiring the laser designation painted on the SAM site. The enemy crew had perhaps 2 seconds to realize what was happening before 600 pounds of high explosive eliminated their position from the tactical equation. The explosion was visible from the command bunker, an orange fireball that rose above the tree line like a miniature sunrise. When the smoke cleared, nothing remained of the surface-to-air missile system except scattered debris and a crater that would be visible on satellite imagery for years to come. Target destroyed, Blackwater 6. That's one less thing to worry about. But Reeves was worried about something else entirely. Through his binoculars, he could see that the A-10 was now trailing heavy black smoke from both engines, its flight path becoming increasingly erratic as damaged systems continued to fail. Reaper 17, your aircraft is showing severe distress. You need to get on the ground immediately. Working on it, Colonel, but I'm not sure I'm going to make it back to base. This bird is hurt pretty bad. The nearest friendly airfield was 40 miles away, a significant distance for an aircraft that was clearly struggling to maintain altitude. Reeves found himself calculating alternatives, none of them good. Reaper 17, there's an auxiliary strip about 12 miles south of your position. It's rough, but it might be long enough for an emergency landing. I'll take a look. A pause. Blackwater 6, I need you to know something. Whatever happens next, it's been an honor flying for you today. The words carried a finality that made Reeves's chest tighten. He'd heard similar transmissions before, usually from pilots who knew they weren't going to make it home. The honor's been mine, Reaper 17. You saved my people today, we won't forget that. Just tell them. Her voice faded for a moment, obscured by static and what sounded like alarms in the cockpit. Tell them that sometimes the only way to win is to refuse to lose. The transmission ended, leaving only the fatting sound of damaged engines as the A-10 disappeared into the distance. 3 hours later, Colonel Reeves received word that Captain Elena Vasquez had successfully executed an emergency landing at the auxiliary airstrip, though her aircraft was declared a total loss due to combat damage. She was uninjured and in good spirits, reportedly asking maintenance personnel when they could get her another airplane. The official after-action report would credit her with destroying 43 enemy vehicles, including 37 main battle tanks, 3 infantry fighting vehicles, 2 self-propelled artillery pieces, and 1 surface-to-air missile system. The engagement would be studied in military academies as an example of exceptional pilot skill and tactical innovation under extreme circumstances. What the report wouldn't capture was the moment when a disgraced pilot chose to risk everything to save people she'd never met, or the way her actions transformed skeptical ground forces into believers who would request her by name for every subsequent mission. Within a month of the bridge engagement, Captain Alina Vasquez was quietly reinstated to full combat status, her previous disciplinary actions mysteriously disappearing from her service record. The Pentagon officials who had orchestrated her grounding found themselves reassigned to positions where their expertise in risk assessment could be better utilized. Specifically, managing supply logistics at remote bases where they couldn't interfere with actual combat operations. The change wasn't officially announced, but word spread quickly through military channels. Ripper was back, and ground commanders began competing to get her assigned to their operations. Lieutenant Colonel Reeves, promoted after his successful defense of the Kharkov Bridge, would later serve as her wingman when she transitioned to squadron command. He never forgot the morning when one pilot and one aircraft had held the line against impossible odds, or the lesson she'd taught him about the difference between following orders and doing what's right. The bridge still stands today, its steel girders bearing scorch marks from that morning's battle. Local civilians call it the Angel Bridge, though few remember why. The official designation remains Objective Sierra, a clinical military term that fails to capture the human drama that unfolded in its shadow. But for the soldiers who were there, who watched Alina, Ripper, Vasquez transformed certain defeat into decisive victory through skill, courage, and an absolute refusal to accept failure. It will always be remembered as the place where legends are made. Alina Vasquez went on to fly 200 more combat missions over the next 5 years, eventually commanding an entire A-10 squadron before retiring with full honors. She never spoke publicly about the bridge engagement, deflecting questions with characteristic humor and redirecting credit to the ground forces she'd supported. Her final efficiency report contained a single line that summarized not just her career, but her approach to life. Captain Vasquez consistently demonstrates that the difference between defeat and victory is often measured not in resources or firepower, but in the willingness of one person to stand up when it matters most. The A-10 Thunderbolt II that she flew that day was officially written off due to combat damage, its remains eventually finding their way to a military museum, where they serve as a testament to both aircraft durability and pilot skill. The nose art, that grinning skull with aviator sunglasses, was carefully preserved and now greets visitors who come to learn about the aircraft that earned the nickname Warthog, through engagements exactly like the one at Kharkov Bridge. Colonel Marcus Reeves kept a photograph from that morning on his desk for the rest of his career, a grainy image of an A-10 silhouetted against the dawn sky, captured at the moment when one pilot's courage changed the outcome of an entire engagement. Visitors would often ask about the photo, and he would tell them the story of the morning when regulations met reality, and reality won. But the real legacy of that day wasn't measured in destroyed enemy equipment or tactical victories. It was found in the careers of junior officers who learned that leadership sometimes means making the hard choice rather than the safe one. In the ground forces who discovered that air support meant more than just calling coordinates over the radio, and in the understanding that military effectiveness comes not from rigid adherence to procedure, but from the intelligent application of training, experience, and moral courage. Years later, when Alina Vasquez was asked what she wanted people to remember about her career, she gave an answer that perfectly captured the spirit of that morning at the bridge. "I hope they remember that when good people needed help, someone showed up. That's all any of us can do, show up when it matters and do our best with whatever we've got. The morning sun that had witnessed the engagement eventually gave way to afternoon, then evening, then the countless days and nights that followed. The tactical situation that had seemed so critical became a footnote in larger strategic movements. The political implications faded into bureaucratic memory. But the human connections forged in those desperate hours endured. The ground forces who had watched one pilot hold the line against impossible odds carried that lesson with them through subsequent deployments. They understood, in a way that couldn't be taught in training manuals, that military effectiveness ultimately comes down to individual people making individual choices about what they're willing to risk for others. Elena Vasquez had shown them that sometimes the most important battles aren't fought by armies or air forces, but by one person in one aircraft who refuses to accept that defeat is inevitable. In a profession where courage is common and heroism is routine, she had demonstrated something rarer: the wisdom to know when rules must be broken, and the strength to accept the consequences. The bridge she saved would carry traffic for generations, connecting communities and enabling commerce in ways that justified every risk taken to preserve it. But the real bridge she built that morning was between the idealistic young pilot who had first pinned on aviator wings and the seasoned combat veteran who understood that some things are worth any sacrifice. That bridge, the one between who we are and who we choose to become when everything is on the line, might be the most important construction project of all.